So I want to thank you for attending. First thing I want to say early in the morning, although it's 11, being a dad, I'm up at about 5. So I wouldn't say it's exactly early, but I want to thank you for coming to our presentation, checking under the hood for a smooth ride. Want to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Sean Dietrich. I am a senior operations architect at Canopy Studios. Part of my position is both to look at existing clients and figure out what their immediate needs are, but also try to plan for their future.
I'm Amy June Heinlein, and that title Camel Case for developers. You can't hear me. Okay, so is that better? Oh no. Okay, so my name is Amy June, and that's titled Camel Case for developers. I am the community ambassador for Canopy Studios, and I also help organize and run Ally Talks. That's A11Y Talks. It's a virtual online meetup where we talk about all things accessibility. Every month we invite different panelists in and that sort of thing.
And just a quick note that Canopy is currently hiring WordPress tech leads and developers. So if you're interested in more information, find us after the talk and we can give you some more.
So why audit your site? That's what we're here to learn about, right? There are many reasons to audit your site. Your site could be slow to load. Site pages take more than 3 seconds. Your site may be not responsive. It doesn't work well on mobile devices or tablets and that sort of thing. You may be having content issues and woes. Updating content has become troublesome and burdensome, and it can be frustrating for your content authors. Your users have become confused over time. They can't find what they need, and sometimes if they can't need, that leads to slower conversions and possible negative feedback. Your visitors may have trouble using your site. They become agitated and frustrated, and they can't use the site with assistive technology like screen readers and magnifiers. Bugs could be creating a disastrous experience and keeps people from visiting your site. Your content is stale and stagnant. It hasn't changed, so your site has become outdated, nothing new. And maybe perhaps your site has become unsecure over time. The site isn't loading over HTTPS, and it's causing security warnings, and people are scared to enter your site. And your site may be compromised and hacked, and now no one can figure out why. Is it really important to address these issues? Yes, of course it is. A website that isn't working optimally can drastically affect your bottom line.
And as time passes, outdated and poorly designed websites can have a negative impact on both you as a company and overall experience of your customers. It's estimated that 39% of people will stop engaging with the website if the content or the layout is unattractive. And then it's estimated that 1.14 billion users are using a tablet. So making sure that your site is responsive and works on all sorts of devices. It's also estimated that 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if images won't load or they take too long to load. So what we do at Canopy is we do an audit when a client comes in, and we try to help them understand what's going on. And so through this, we're going to kind of explain what those different aspects are. But to really see optimal website health, you need to not only have a solid code base, but you also need to have a solid technical foundation along with smart user experience. At Canopy, we like to make data-driven decisions. So we dig into things such as actual site usage. What features work, what don't work? Does the site meet the UX best practices? And then we provide recommendations. Some of the way we collect data is through surveys, through heat mapping, and definitely through analytics of how people are actually using the site. We will be, just a quick note, we will be tweeting the slides out after. So just in case, we are gonna go a little bit quick. So if you don't have to take notes all necessarily, but if you wanna see them afterwards. And then once we've done that, we take a look at the technical side of things. We strive to know how everything works from every little piece of code that's in there, both making it easier to support the site for the client's needs, but also making it easier so that they understand. We'll look at the hosting to confirm that the client is getting the most for their money. And then we provide feedback about ways to be efficient, ways that we can help them lower the cost of development over the future. Understanding exactly who the site can effectively and correctly communicate is also something we do. We run an initial scan of tools to check both HTML structure and basic page overviews. We use analytics to identify top traffic pages. And additionally, we use other items such as keyboards to check for if people with keyboards can use it properly. And then we finish off with the voiceover to make sure the correct semantics and attributes are reported properly. Periodically, we check in and review for accessibility improvements along the road, as accessibility is one of those things that you just don't set it and forget it. Over time, it needs to make sure that you are constantly keeping up to date with it. And then we unpack it all. We start, so when we start, what exactly are we doing? First, we run preliminary checks. These are basic things that tell us exactly what we're working with immediately out of the gate. So what version of WordPress core are we using? Next, we use the health check page to see what outstanding issues there might be. Now, the health check page was just introduced in 5.2. So previously there was a plugin called Site Health Check that was also did the same exact thing. And previous to that, we'll use that plugin. Next, we look at any sort of debugging logs to see if there's been any sort of ongoing issues. And then we use WP CLI to check if core or plugins files have been modified in any way. If they've been hacked, if they've been modified, we want to make note of that so that the client understands the impact of that. Next, we examine the theme or the look and the feel of the site. We review different aspects. So one, we definitely want to check the overall file structure. Are things organized? Is the site functionality tied to the theme? Meaning, if you want to switch your theme, is that going to break functionality within the site? Is a page builder being used? There are many popular page builders out there. So we want to be able to make sure that any sort of recommendation we make, we know exactly what they're using and what we can recommend to them. And then next, are we using flat CSS files? We're using now Sass and some sort of pre-processing style sheets. We want to be able to know that and tell them so that they can understand that as well. And then lastly, are JavaScript best practices being used? One of the additional things we look for is we check the site for SEO. Biggest thing is the site using a sitemap? One of those things that Google likes to see is it a sitemap, and do they like to, is it properly formatted? One of the additional things we sort of recommend is the Yoast SEO plugin, which has a similar plugin installed that help with XML sitemaps, meta tags, and SEO. Is it installed? Is it configured? And those are the things we like to kind of figure out and tell the client, yes, they are, or no, they're not, and give recommendations on those. Are tools like Google Search Console being used? Particularly, that's the one we recommend because Google we get to know how Google sees your site or their site specifically. And we can try to find and fix errors quickly so that it doesn't start affecting their indexing. Additional thing we use is Google PageSpeed. An additional item that Google offers for free is how does your site perform? And obviously a poorly performing website is something that ends up hurting your rankings. Once we've done all that, we review custom code. Sometimes it's necessary to build a custom plugin. And at that point, we want to review and make sure what custom plugins are being used. Is there 1, 2, 10? Is this something that could be, is it something that's documented? How things are, how work, what the purpose of that plugin is for? And can functionality be done with the help of other plugins? So are we reinventing the wheel and would be better done with a contributed plugin? Next, we also look, we assess the code quality. So when reviewing the code quality, we use PHP Code Sniffer. WordPress releases coding standards that we check plugins against to make sure, are things formatted properly? Are they in the right syntax? Is it the right version of PHP for what we're using? Then we check for code comments. Is everything documented properly? Functions, everything down to the nitty-gritty of what different lines are doing. And that's because for more complex plugins, we'd like to be able to jump in there immediately and quickly assess rather than spending hours trying to figure out and guess what that specific thing is doing. And then we review the code for possible improvements. All code can be improved over time. There are new, as versions of PHP are coming out, there are more efficient ways of writing things. So we look for those and see, is there a way we can improve upon that? And then we read the docs. We look and see, has everything been documented? How do you set up the site locally? How does the plugin work? How does the theme work? How do you set up the theme locally? If you need to expand upon the theme, what are the special tools that we need to know? And we look for that to make sure that going forward, we can improve upon that, but also anybody else who comes on the project, it's easier for them to get up and running. One of the final things we do is we test accessibility. So we want to ensure that all users, regardless of abilities, can interact with the site in a meaningful way. By doing that, we usually do a brief accessibility audit. We also can do a much more elaborate audit. But as part of this technical audit, we take the top 3 traffic pages, as stated by Google Analytics, and we use common tools to test accessibility, such as the Wave tool, Axe Core, voiceover commands, keyboards. We're disabling JavaScript and CSS, and we're navigating just to make sure that everything is functional. One of the final things was mentioned was we push the performance of the site. If someone decides to get a spike of traffic, we want to make sure that what they currently have is adequate. Is it working for what their needs are? So we review the current hosting solution, and is their current plan correct? Should they be on a lower, possibly saving them money? Should they be increased to help them increase the performance of the site and stop overusing resources so that everybody who visits the site can have a similar experience?
So I want to talk a little bit about assistive technology. Assistive technology can include lots of things: screen readers, magnification software, speech input devices, voiceover, alternative input devices like motion tracking or head pointing, and single switch devices. And they're constantly improving assistive technology. And so there's so many to think about while you do an accessibility audit. Accessibility is essential for developers and organizations that want to create high quality websites and web tools and not exclude people from using their products and services. According to the CDC, 26% of people living in the United States live with a disability. Roughly 1 in 4, or 61 million people. And remember, not all disabilities are permanent. You have situational disabilities, you have temporary disabilities, and you have unseen disabilities. Users with mobility issues, including repetitive stress injuries, may not be able to use a mouse or trackpad. So can keyboard users navigate your site? Are there keyboard traps? Can they get out of the situation? Can they get out of your accordions? Can they get out of your menus? If they can enter it, make sure that they can exit. Does your page have sufficient means to skip features in an application? There should be a link on the top of your page to skip to main content or skip to navigation. Pages with a lot of content should be broken up and use smaller chunks using anchor links. Do all of your elements receive keyboard focus? When people are navigating, can they see where they are on your page? All menus and levels of a site should be accessible to a keyboard user. So we want to avoid buttons and action items that are only accessible by a mouse or a hover. Do all of your images contain alt text? You know, this is sort of a basic and lots of people know this. But think about if you turn off your CSS, can you read through the site without getting lost? This isn't only for screen readers, but some folks with cognitive issues will turn off the styles and just have, you know, a blank page. And this is also relevant for people who live in areas where their internet is slow and images take forever. So alt text is pretty important. Are tables used for more than tabular data? Remember that tables are for data and not for layout anymore. Remember, we used to do the Dreamweaver tables and that sort of thing. Well, we don't do that anymore. So remember, when you format a table, you need to make sure that screen readers can access all of that information. They should include headers and rows and columns and explain how the cells correspond with each other. Does the screen reader read all of the content as it's presented on the page? Is there a good flow? You know, does it skip around? This includes modal dialogues, overlays, pop-outs, light boxes, slideshows, error messages, page updates. Be sure that all of those alerts are read in real time. Can your text be resized without obscuring your content, right? Can a screen magnifier see things without having to scroll both ways? The page should be functionable when the text is magnified to 200% of its original size. And again, that scrolling both ways is really aggravating, and you can lose people because they can't see all of your content. Are your landmark regions properly defined between ARIA and HTML5? Because remember, the first rule of ARIA is not to use ARIA. So if you can build it in semantic HTML5, do that. So basically, what makes your website accessible? There's 4 broad parameters that we consider when we make our content accessible. We want to make sure that it's easy to see, so we accommodate folks' visual needs. We want to make sure that folks can interact with it, so we accommodate motor needs. You know, there's tremors and people who are on a bus and things like that, the situational disabilities. You want to make sure that your website, if it has media, that it can be heard, so you accommodate auditory needs. And you want to make sure that everyone can understand your content, so we address cognitive needs as well. We want to make sure that the experience for every user is the same regardless of what they're using too. And this is something to think about with like computer size, tablet size, phone operating size. So content, it's just as important as code. All of your accessible code in the world won't do you any good if your content isn't accessible. So we want to make sure that our content doesn't leave folks behind as well. As the internet expands and extends, we become a world stage, right? We have to remember that reading and understanding English can be a privilege. Our content should be easy for everyone to understand. According to usability.gov, we want to write at the 9th grade reading level. Our standard for paragraphs is no more than 20 words per sentence and 5 sentences per paragraph. We want to make sure that we use plain language, things that everyone can understand. And remember, we're all in this case, no one reads anymore, we scan. So we want to make sure we break up our content in bullet points and easily digestible chunks, numbered lists, things like that. And of course, captions, subtitles, and alt text. We want to be sure our images, our videos, and any visual information has alternative text. When creating the alt text, we want to make sure that that text contains the message we want to convey. We also want to make sure that if an image contains text, that screen readers know what that said too. So if your image has a text in it, you want to make sure your alt text reflects that. If your site contains a slideshow, make sure that each photo has alt text. Make sure that everyone can navigate it with their keyboard. Make sure that the controls can be seen by users. Captions should include inflection, such as yelling or whispering. Image captions may contain content, may give content, the alt text, such as like an alt text could say something like, man and boy playing basketball, but the caption would say, studies show that bonding between father and son, blah, blah, blah. So there's differences between what you write, and you don't want it to be redundant text because a screen reader will read your title, your caption, your alt text. So be sure that that's not redundant as well. We need to remember when we enter our content that headings are not for style. They have a function and people rely on them, especially those who use assistive devices. They rely on the headings to be consistent and predictable. And we also use them because we don't read anymore, we scan. Remember, H1 is our title and they're nested, H1 through H6. They're used to define the headings, one being the most important and nesting like an outline we did in high school. So, you know, 2, 3, 4, you never want to have those out of order.
All right, so wrapping up, the biggest thing we say is audits are important to not just developers, but to site owners. So they know the status of everything. An audit can consist of different sections: technical, UX, and accessibility. And then when reviewing the technical side, look at the different aspects from WordPress's status report to reviewing the performance of the site. When conducting any sort of UX audit, data is important to make the best decisions. So remember doing things through analytics, heat mapping, and sometimes even surveys. Understanding why your users are using the site is just as important as the data you get in analytics. Also, web accessibility encompasses all disabilities that affect access to the web. Accessibility isn't just code, but can consist of content. When reviewing accessibility code, make sure to check against WCAG standards. And when making sure content is accessible, make sure it is structured and easy to understand.
We're going to open up more of a space for questions and answers. So does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. So, Sean, when you guys do these audits, like the clients, the kind of things that keep not doing stuff, even if they don't have analytics, you run into that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Are you installing that stuff and waiting a month to get like better data?
Yeah, so the heat mapping doesn't come as our initial audit. Usually what that will entail is we use Hotjar has a kind of feature that we recommend to the clients. You can use 3 pages. So we'll install a plugin for Hotjar, and what we'll do is we'll run that for a period of time. It could be a week, it could be for a month, it could be for 2 months. It's just some defined period of time. We'll look at it over time.